Hey, what's up, everybody? It's me, the Super Sleuth, live right here with Jeremiah Roberts.
I'm one of the co-hosts here.
That's right. And guys, this ministry cannot continue without your support. We've been doing this for years because of you, and you're funding us to be able to do that. So please continue partnering with us. And if you haven't partnered with us yet, please go to the link that's the pinned comment on YouTube or in our show notes. If you're listening to this on the podcast, you can donate one time or partner with us monthly. Again, we can't do it without you, and we want to keep going to get that gospel proclamation continuing on, entering the kingdom of the cults with the power of the gospel. Anything else you want to add to that, Jerry?
No, we're very thankful for you. We regularly get messages of those who have been impacted, who've gotten out of different cults, and that's really because you have partnered with us, and really on our website to be part of the mission to change lives. That is happening on a regular basis. So thank you for much for those of you who supported us.
That's right. You can go to thecultishtshow.com, click the donate tab, or you can just click the link below. Talk to you soon. Welcome back to Cultish, everybody, where we enter into the kingdom of the cults. Look at me. I'm flying solo today, but guess what? Jerry will be here soon enough. Not in time for the finishing of the recording of this first very special episode, but you'll see him on the next one. And this time, right now, at the super secret headquarters, although I have a black curtain behind me, we are going to be recording an awesome episode with a guest that you have not heard in quite a while. We've missed her so much. But before I introduce her, I got to play the clip that we always play. Here we go.
Release the Kraken!
That's right. That's right. You may have guessed it. If you've been listening to Cultish for years now, we have back the one, the only Kraken, Marcia Montenegro. Marcia, how are you doing?
I am doing so well. Thank you so much. Thanks for the Kraken introduction there. And
You're more than welcome.
I have missed being the Kraken, so I'm glad to have that role again today. Thanks.
Praise God. Marcia, we also had a fan make a shirt with your face on it as the
Yes.
Kraken. Have you seen that?
Yes, that was great. They made the drawing, and then you guys had it put on shirts and a mug as well, a coffee mug.
That's right.
And
Did we ever send you one by any chance?
yes, you did. You did send me one, and then I had a friend who bought mugs, Kraken mugs for several people, several friends, mutual friends of ours, from church. So that was really fun because I think you sent a shirt too. I think you sent a shirt too.
Awesome.
So yes,
Praise God.
I did
I'm
get
glad.
that. That was exciting. I really enjoyed that.
Praise God. I'm glad. And Marcia, so for everyone who may not be familiar with you, she is the Kraken, but give us some of your credentials, where people can find your information, your blog, and things of that nature.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yes, my ministry is Christian Answers for the New Age, and I have a background in the New Age. I was involved in the New Age for at least 20 years. My interest in it started earlier, even though I had a background of going to church when I was younger. I eventually rejected Christianity and wanted to explore other spiritual paths. And that led to me becoming a full-time professional certified astrologer. I also was very involved in Eastern meditation. First, it was Hindu, then Tibetan Buddhist, and then Zen Buddhist, which is what I stayed with the longest. So I was into the Eastern, especially Buddhist worldviews, astrology very strongly. And then I kind of dabbled into other areas, tarot cards, past life regression, psychic experiences, etc. There's a whole lot of stuff there that I got into. But even though I was going completely against God and completely rejected the truth of who Jesus really is, God mercifully intervened in my life and pulled me out of all that. And so there was a Christian praying for me, which I only found out 4 months after I was saved. And, that shows prayer. God does want us to pray for people. It shows that God can save anybody, even someone who's very hardened in the New Age, who has rejected, Christian, or what I thought was Christianity, and who didn't want anything to do with it, frankly. I mean, I didn't. So all of that eventually led to speaking about the New Age, giving my testimony, writing, going to conferences, and that became a full-time ministry. And so I actually operate as a missionary, and my mission agency is Fellowship International Mission, which is based in Allentown, Pennsylvania, although I live in Northern Virginia.
Ah, praise God. Well, Marcia, I'm glad that you're here, and I'm glad that we're going to be talking about someone or something, a movement, essentially today, that needs to be talked about. It needs to be discussed. There's a documentary on Netflix. I'm not sure if our listeners have seen it or not, but it's called Tony Robbins, I Am Not Your Guru.
Yes.
Which I find to be kind of contradicting
Yes.
in nature on the title. But
Yes.
before we get into the worldview behind Tony Robbins, at least what we can suspect from listening to all of his content, very briefly, Marcia, who is Tony Robbins?
Tony Robbins is a kind of a self-made, entrepreneur who at one time was of course not known, did not have a lot of money, but he got known through his motivational teachings, books and seminars primarily, with just thousands and thousands of people going to his seminars. And his name became very big out there because he was popular, and his books were popular. He was on a lot of television programs, interviews, things like that, and the publicity for him was just huge. So it seems like almost anybody, or not almost anybody, almost everybody probably has heard his name, at least, even if they're not sure who he is. Tony Robbins is going to ring a bell, but a lot of people know who he is, or they kind of have an idea of him. I've also discovered that a lot of Christians thought he was, or think he's a Christian, which I was very surprised by when I first came across that. That was a number of years ago. And I thought, oh, I never really thought anybody would think he was a Christian, but apparently some people do. So he's just, he's still a big name and still doing his seminars and everything, which costs a lot. I mean, they're not cheap.
Yeah,
So
they're not cheap at all. And
no.
they're days long. I think they're around they could be almost a week long, 12 hours a day for these seminars.
Yeah, they can be very lengthy. Now there are many people in this. This is kind of a thing that you find, especially in the United States. You find these motivational type seminars and meetings. A lot of them are over weekends, so they're weekend type seminars. And these things go way back to probably rooted in Werner Erhard's Est seminars, that were, I think, started in the 60s, the 60s. Mainly they were popular in the 70s and on, until he got into trouble with the IRS. I think he went overseas, but the S seminars became landmark, but they were kind of a seed of these other motivational things. And they were very intense weekends that people went to and got a teaching where you had to stay in the room. You couldn't leave the room for any reason. They would have breaks, but you could only go out at the breaks. And there was a lot of intense kind of manipulation going on that, of course, the people were not aware of. But there were certain methods that these people used to condition people's minds. But the idea behind it was you were going to have some kind of breakthrough. You were going to have some kind of realization or some kind of new insight that was going to completely change your life. And that kind of seminar and that kind of practice that caught on and was replicated by other people really is still going on. It's a little more subtle now because some of these people got sued for their tactics, ended up actually harming people. And so I think they kind of toned it down a little bit. but those manipulative tactics are still going on. And the promise of either having a new insight, becoming a new person, discovering a new you, or discovering your hidden powers. Kind of like you don't understand your potential. And I'm going to show you what that is. That's the bottom line. And a lot of people who maybe aren't doing well in life, who've had a lot of barriers, who have maybe had abusive backgrounds, who have low self-confidence are drawn to this. And they think this is my answer. I have this unlimited potential in me, which is what Tony Robbins says. And so these teachings continue to attract people, including books. They're books that are kind of do the same thing in a book that you would get in a weekend seminar, except it's more intense if you go go to the seminar. But you get the same idea is there. And it's a very big idea in the United States. It's very American.
I believe that. What's interesting is something that you said. I mean, we're going to break it down in a little bit, but real quick, we're going to go later in the episode on methods, techniques that are used in order to manipulate individuals who go to these seminars. And part of that worldview, this new thought, new age as well, worldview, is the fact that they believe words have power manifestation.
Yes.
So words in books, words that are spoken. We're going to get into that. But you said something very interesting, Marcia. You said a lot of Christians think that he's Christian. And I can understand that, because I remember when I was a kid, I used to listen to this band called Linkin Park, and I would tell myself everything I could, trying to convince myself by their lyrics that they're Christian. I would even sometimes change the lyrics. Anyone who's listening, I used to listen to the one song. It's like, I'm one step closer to the edge and I'm about to break. I used to change the words to I'm one step closer to the edge and I'm about to pray.
Wow.
in order just to enjoy it more.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think some of that happens within these circles. It's something that you hear, something that piques your interest, because a lot of things that Tony Robbins says are true in a sense. They're true in a sense. There's always enough truth just to hook you. And then the falsehood comes in. But Marcia, why is it important, or how can we delineate between good motivational speakers and ones that are manipulating individuals and spreading a false message? Because I mean, it's not inherently sinful to go to a motivational speaker. So how do we think about this as Christians?
Well, I think it would depend on what the motivation is for. If the motivation is about you in terms of discovering something new or some unlimited potential, that would not be biblical. If it's motivational in the sense of encouragement in a biblical sense, to motivate you to study the Bible more, to motivate you to, here's another good way to study scripture, here's another good way to learn this particular skill. Like if you're going to just a job related thing to learn new skills, and it's to motivate you to do that. I mean, those kind of things are okay, practical things, or something biblical along that line. Usually, though, I have to say the word motivational, kind of makes me cringe, because it's very much connected to this new thought, this whole movement that we've been discussing. And it's very hard to line that up with the Bible unless you make it very clear that it is motivating you to do something that's going to honor God more, a good way to, gosh, I'm trying to think of something, because I can't actually, so I'm having a hard time thinking of something really biblical aside from here's some motivation to study the word, or here's motivation for memorizing scripture. Maybe, are you memorizing scripture? No. Okay. Well, let me motivate you on why that's a good idea to memorize scripture. That kind of motivational thing. Yeah, that is okay.
Yeah. So like thinking of seminars, the argument that you're making is most of these quote unquote motivational seminars, though they may use positive terms, many times they're loaded packages that come with a worldview that's antithetical to the Christian
Yes.
message and gospel in general. Like now, I
Yes.
would say that if there's a motivational speaker, just because we use the word motivation, and they're speaking on practical lessons on helping you and your family or whatever with work, practical applications without a loaded worldview, like in terms of meditation techniques or emptying your mind or saying, today is the pinnacle of your existence, so you can find your best self and unleash it now through chanting and stuff. That if that's not going on, I don't think that's wrong. And I think that we would have the liberty as Christians to partake in some such types of practical seminars. Absolutely. It's just like the Bible uses the word meditate, right? But we know that false religions take the word meditate and it means something totally different than the Christian definition. As Christians, we say God is the one who controls words. God is the one who controls the definitions that we at least assign to in truth. So we can use the word, but it's a loaded package, and that's what we have to unload today. So you're saying basically motivational speaking and life coaching in general usually has a worldview package. So let's kind of unpackage some of that worldview if you can. Typically with these seminars, specifically Tony Robbins here, what is that underlying worldview?
Yes, the underlying worldview there is that you have an unlimited potential to do anything, that there is nothing off limits. You know, there's nothing that you can't do if you set your mind to it and if you want it. So if you desire it and you really set your mind to it and believe that you can achieve it, then you can do anything. That's kind of the basics of it. And then it goes from there, you know, where as you referred to earlier, what you think and what you say will actually bring something into reality. So, for example, you do affirmations. This is part of it too. And so affirmations are where you repeat something either in your mind, or you can write it out over and over again. Ideally, you would do both, and you would repeat it on a regular basis, and that will bring it about into reality. It will manifest into reality. So this teaching, which comes from New Thought, really is a technique found in sorcery. So because the idea of sorcery is that you can manifest something into existence that does not exist. Or really the idea is that it exists on another level. It's not in a material form, but by doing these techniques, and with sorcery, you would do it with rituals, with occult techniques, you would do with occult rituals. In New Thought, you do it with your words and your mind, believing it, then you bring it into a material manifestation, whatever it might be. It could be a material object like a new car, or it could be something like a job. You know, this job is what I want, so I'm going to start affirming that I have this job. And then you supposedly can bring that into reality. So, but I wanted to point out it is a technique from sorcery. So, but in New Thought, they're not, of course, using, you know, ritual magic or the techniques of sorcery, but they're using this other technique of affirmation. And so the belief in this is very strong. And this idea is also in the New Age. It comes from New Thought, but New Age incorporated a lot of New Thought ideas. So there's a lot of overlap there. So you'll find people in the New Age who do this as well. And this idea of manifesting things. So if you don't really believe, so if it doesn't happen, then the idea is you didn't really believe it. You didn't really think it could happen. You didn't really think you deserve this or something like that. So the failure is going to be on your part if it doesn't manifest. It's not because it doesn't work or because it's a wrong technique or an evil technique. That's not it at all. It's because you did something wrong and didn't quite bring it into existence. I did want to mention, I forgot to mention earlier in the little intro there, that I do have a website, Christian Answer. It's a new website too, I think, since I was last on with you guys. It's christiananswersnewage.com. And it just went up in, well, I'm not sure when our last show was, but it just went up in 2023. So hasn't been up too long. But on that website, I have a lot of my articles, and I've added tons of articles since then. And I have an article on affirmations. So, and
Perfect.
also on New Thought. So
Perfect. So thinking of New Thought and trying to separate it categorically, I think it's on the same level as sorcery, 110%. Categorically in methods of occult sorcery, I mean, in the Hermetic tradition, ritualistic magic usually contains things like scrying, right?
yes,
Or a divining rod. There's usually objects made from the material world that either you craft or whatever. Ouija board, for example, that allows you to use that to gain access into a realm of knowledge through an object. But New Thought essentially would argue and state that you are the object, right?
yeah,
Your mind
yeah,
is the object.
yes,
Your words are the object.
right.
So let's even pull that back a little bit. So underlying that principle that you're the object is something that they believe about God and themselves, right?
Yes,
So
yes,
ontologically, what do they believe about God and what do they believe about themselves?
yes. God is viewed more as a sort of principle or force or the source of everything, depending, on it can be termed differently by different people. But the idea is that you are a part of that. You come from God, you are connected to God. Therefore, your nature also is divine. And once you realize that, see, a New Thought, once you realize your divine nature, you reach Christ consciousness, because Jesus was the example. He was a man who realized his divine nature, and so he achieved Christ consciousness. And he did that to show us we could do it. Now, that's the New Thought teaching. So if you really think you come from God and you share the same kind of nature as God, and you see God as this source of everything, then you think, well, then I can also bring something into, being. I can manifest something as well. I can create, and I'll create with my thoughts and words. And so, because of that idea of God and the connection to God in New Thought, that also underlies why they think you can do this. You're not just this human being out here created by God and distinct from God, because God, of course, is not like man, and we are created in his image, but we do not have those attributes of God. But if you don't have that biblical worldview, and your worldview is New Thought, that you really are connected to God and have this kind of divine power in you, then you really believe you can do these things and manifest them.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's no necessarily creator creation distinction. You've
Right.
heard Jerry, you've heard Jerry talk about it a lot, guys, on the episodes. Oneism and twoism. It would fall under oneism, right? Even panentheism and pantheism, essentially in general. I know there's a difference between the two. So, Marcia, within this New Thought realm, what do they believe about the material world?
Well, the material world is usually viewed as a manifestation of the spiritual world, which is another reason they think you can bring things into existence. So the material world is a manifestation of the spiritual world. In some cases, and I think you're going to find different views in it, but in some cases, that means that everything in reality is something we've manifested, therefore it can change. It's not really permanent. It doesn't really have substance. So that's why we can change reality with our thoughts. And this can even be done on a massive scale, like humanity can manifest maybe a war because because of their thinking, their fears. Because see, it goes along with your fears too. If you fear things, then you can bring about things that aren't good. So you could bring about, if you're always afraid, of getting a certain illness, and you live in that fear, you can manifest that illness because your fear has manifested it. So it can be a negative thing. So, and you can manifest an accident, like a car accident out of fear. So that's the other side of it. We were talking about manifesting money or a job or a car or whatever, but here it could be an illness or a car accident. So reality isn't really, it's kind of this fluid thing. Now, it's very close to non-dual Hinduism is the belief that this is all an illusion. It's all Maya. They call it Maya. That's a non-dual Hinduism. I do want to point out there is a dualistic Hinduism because a lot of people don't realize that. They think all Hinduism is non-dual, and that's not true. There is a dualistic Hinduism. But the non-dual Hinduism is what influenced the New Age. And that idea is in the New Age too, that everything is an illusion. It's all Maya. So that's a little bit different, but similar to the New Thought idea. But, they don't talk a lot about that in the things I've read and the people I've heard in New Thought, they talk more about how to get somewhere or get something or achieve something. They're very focused on using these powers or these abilities and understanding these abilities and sharing that idea with other people. And they're more focused on that than a philosophical approach. I don't think New Thought is known for like philosophical ponderings. Where they're pondering things like, oh, what is the nature of reality? That's so you don't find a lot of that when you're reading New Thought stuff. Maybe some people who are more philosophical might write about it more, but you find more practical kind of teachings. Like The Secret is a good example. We've been talking about New Thought. If people, now enough time has passed, there might be people who don't know that much about The Secret. But at one point when it came out around, I think 2005 or 2006, it was so popular that it came out as a DVD and as a book. And it was so popular in the bookstores, they couldn't keep the books on the shelf. I mean, they were literally, I had a friend at church who was working at the time in Barnes and Noble, and he said, we literally cannot keep that book on the shelf. I mean, we have pre-orders, and as soon as our order comes in, already every book is already spoken for, and people come and get it.
I mean, it kind of speaks to the human condition, right?
Yeah.
The secret is that there's an issue that all of us face and we want to fix it somehow. Quick question for you too, Marcia. We were talking about essentially the ontology, what they believe about God, what they believe about the creation. If God is a principle, that means us as individuals don't necessarily exist. That more of a principle or a cosmic soup would mean that we as humanity don't have individualism. Essentially, like I believe what God says in his word, that we're created in the image of God. So we're worthy of life, value, respect, dignity, all these beautiful things. We're different even from the rest of the creation in that regard. And I also would view you, Marcia, as a different person than myself.
Right. Right.
New Thought ontologically would state that everyone isn't anyone, right? And I think it comes out a lot during Tony Robbins talks where he's always talking about love somebody. Well, it's because no one's anybody. And if you have sin and suffering or wrong things that happen from one individual to another, truly it's you just doing it to you. So would it be fair to say that within the New Thought realm that there is no individualism?
I guess, if you think of what they believe, and this is something you hear in the, let me just mention the 3 New Thought churches that people have probably heard of, or they've heard at least 2 of these. One is the Christian Science Church. The other is Unity, which used to be called Unity School of Christianity. Now they just call Unity. And the Church of Religious Science all came from New Thought. All of the founders of those 3 churches were influenced by or very involved in New Thought and sometimes other belief systems too. Unity, Millard was also Millard. Now, I was calling him Millard Fillmore. That was a president, wasn't it? Was that? Wait, no, Millard Fillmore, was that a president? I'm sorry. No, now I can't think of his name. It's the I think it's Fillmore. I'm going to have to check it. Anyway, he and his wife started Unity. He had also been influenced by Buddhism and some Eastern religions. She was influenced by divine science, Christian Science. Mary Baker Eddy started the Christian Science Church, and Ernest Holmes, who is the one that came up with affirmations, started with his brother Fenwick Holmes, started the Church of Religious Science, which several years ago they changed to the name Centers for Spiritual Living. So that is their name now. I don't think it's a very catchy name. So it's like, why did they change it? But they did. All of those are churches. They actually are, buildings, and they have services that came out of New Thought. Now, so in Christian Science, one of the things Mary Baker Eddy said is God is all that exists. And I've actually heard, this said by, I think it was it wasn't Della Reese, it was Roma Downey. Roma Downey from Touched by an Angel, who's Roman Catholic. I heard her say that on a program. That's because her mentor was Della Reese, and Della Reese had been a Unity minister. And I think that's, and clearly Roma Downey has a New Thought worldview, even though she's Roman Catholic. And I think it's because of, or at least partly because of the influence of Della Reese, who was a Unity minister. So if you think about it, God, it's at first when people say it, like when she said on the interview, this was on a Christian program, the person interviewing her, and you could kind of hear the audience go, oh, that's so kind of like, that's so honoring to God. God is all that exists. But when you think about it, that is not biblical at all. God is all that exists. That means everything is God or part of God, and nothing else exists. So we're all part of God. Everything, creation is part of God, which is basically pantheism. And so that idea, that would mean individuality is either just a construct or an illusion. And so individuality doesn't really exist, which is very ironic because New Thought teachings are so focused on you and you finding your, what you can achieve and your unlimited potential within. It sounds very individualistic, and the United States is a very individualistic country. We're much more individualistic than Europe, very much more, like 10 times or 100 times more than Europe. So this individualistic mentality in the United States actually is very much at odds with what true New Thought teaches. And yet the motivational teachings are so popular in this country, and they come out of New Thought. And the actual idea of it is the individuality is all just a construct. It's just almost kind of funny. It would be funny if it weren't sad that all these people get caught up in it, but it's very strange. It's this huge contradiction, which you find all false teachings. And I always say this, all teachings outside of biblical Christianity are going to fall apart because they're all inherently contradictory at some level.
Wait. How'd you get here, bro?
Oh,
did Marcia and I just manifest you? Or
basically, you thought me into existence.
So I thought myself into existence.
Thinking about you, Jerry.
What the heck?
Can you think my travel like out of existence? That's the real question.
Let's try to affirmate it out of existence.
Yeah. So a reason I'm late is that I was driving from Georgia and Wyoming back to Utah. So it's good to be back with you, back in here in Utah, back in one of your many super secret headquarters. So, and also we're good to be reunited with the Kraken. I know you did the complimentary intro, which I'm very happy to hear.
Amen.
So Marcia, I want to ask you just a quick question. I know we're just unpacking Tony Robbins. So I remember way back when, years and years ago, just being a kid and all of a sudden flipping the channels and watching an infomercial on Tony Robbins and seeing all the people who are excited, jumping up and down and super emotional. I think the program that they were promoting was something called Release the Giant Within or something of that nature. Yeah. That was the name of the book.
Awaken the Giant Within.
Yeah. So my question would be is that, because you mentioned when I sat down, put on my headphones, I hear you talking about New Thought. I know about it. Melissa Doherty, good friend of ours, has been on the podcast, and you know her. That's what she came out of. The tricky thing with the New Age, New Thought, it takes things that are real, that are part of the human experience, but then it always attaches a caboose of an unbelieving, destructive worldview that is antithetical to the Christian worldview. So my question would just be, as we're sort of unpacking Tony Robbins and New Thought, a lot of our audience know what that is. Like, what part of what Tony Robbins does is real and tangible, like part of the human experience? But where does it turn where you're like, wait a second? That's a tricky thing, because a lot of the personal development stuff, they talk about things that are real, like, having a focused, productive morning, getting up early, and, putting yourself in a good mood. That's part of the human experience. But then it starts to get woo woo after that. They throw in stuff that makes it weird. How does Tony Robbins fit into that equation?
Well, I think in several ways. For one thing, the idea that everybody has unlimited potential. It's one thing to say you can, you have this goal, and if you work hard and focus, you can achieve it. Don't be down on yourself or something like that. That's one thing. But it's another thing to say there's this unlimited, really basically divine, although he doesn't use that word, divine potential in there, where there's there's no boundaries at all. So right away, first of all, that's unrealistic. For most people, most people can't achieve anything they want, and that's unrealistic. Although it sounds good and it makes people feel better. And he also talks about being, true to yourself. Well, then what does that mean? You have to stop and think, what does it mean, yourself? Well, yourself is this part always connected to God. So that's why you have this unlimited divine potential. So if you're going to be true to that self, and if that self existed, then that might be okay to say, but that self doesn't exist because you don't have this divine, unlimited self. So right away, it's really, I think from the get-go, I think he says things that people interpret in a practical way, that they think it's just motivational. It's believing in myself. It's, thinking I can do it, even though my whole life I heard, maybe I heard my father say, oh, you'll never make anything of yourself. You're a loser or whatever. So then you hear Tony Robbins say, you can achieve anything. Then of course you think, okay, I'm going to, that's what I believe. I want to believe I really am worth something, and I can achieve things. So you're getting out of this negative past, but it goes into, the idea is this unlimited thing that's not even realistic. So it's kind of a trap in a way for people who are really seeking maybe more self-confidence or something like that.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's tricky and nuanced. Andrew, I'll let you jump in as well too. Is that, did you watch the entire documentary?
I watched like 90% of it.
Yeah. I remember watching that years ago. It's honestly one of my favorite documentaries just because of what they capture, and I was just so enamored by just watching it. What was just interesting with you mentioning that is that, a lot of folks are going to that specific event in that Netflix documentary, and, they're just going for they want to fix something in their life. But when you look at it progress, especially how it ends towards the end, it's an inherent, like everyone at the very end is having this spiritual experience that looks exactly virtually identical to a typical like evangelical megachurch. And I remember watching it for the first time, and I was asking myself, how do I differentiate between the two? Like what this megachurch experience with the lights and their hands up, and the person at the Tony Robbins event doing the exact same thing. Like those events, as much as even if the intent is just to, hey, I want to figure out ways to be more productive, inclusive. Some people had issues with their marriage. Other people just wanted to fix their business. But everyone at the very end has this inherent spiritual experience. It seems inevitable everyone went that route.
Hey, I want to tag onto that, Marcia, too. Maybe get your thought juices flowing here, Kraken. So when I think about it, I thought the exact same thing, Jerry. Yeah. And I also thought about the Second Great Awakening within the United States and the tent revival preaching that was going on. I think what we're seeing today with these seminars, and Marcia went into the history of these seminars a little earlier, is just a modern reflection of the Second Great Awakening with the New Thought spin and package. So you take a tent revival, and the purpose of what the tent revival was, you put it inside a hotel or maybe another tent outside, and you mimic music at the beginning, right? You mimic emotionalism, and you mimic everything that was occurring at the Second Great Awakening in the United States of America, but just throw it with a new thought package.
Yeah, and what's really interesting, just let me jump in because I'm just on my mind, I just reflecting on the documentary, and I have had friends who are big Tony Robbins fans who are at the events. Is that these events that he does, like they go long. You're talking about like 3 to 5 days, 12 hours a day. I remember a friend of mine, a colleague, he went to a Tony Robbins concert. It might as well be a concert because sometimes they get people so jazzed up. Like you have to do things to get people focused for 12 hours a day. And they had a moment where everyone's like jumping up and down. They're playing this thumping music and they're firing water guns and super soakers everywhere.
Yeah.
There's a lot that goes into effect to get people there. So there for that amount of time. So as these conferences progress, there is that undue influence, that groupthink, and eventually, whenever everyone to the final crescendo where they're selling from the stage or everyone, like people get into a very vulnerable, suggestible state. So when you look at the times where Tony Robbins is having those encounters with someone, like if you've seen the documentary with the sex trafficking victim, which is like, oh man, that just gives me goosebumps thinking about how intense that scene was. But like, you see, like what led up to that was hours upon hours of just being in this groupthink environment.
Yes, there's a lot of I had mentioned earlier to manipulation. And in this documentary, I Am Not Your Guru, which is the first time Tony Robbins allowed cameras to come in and film him doing this. This is the first time that anybody not there could see it. And so it's very eye-opening to watch because you can see some of them. If you know anything about the manipulative techniques used in groups like this, you can see it where they do certain things. Well, for example, one thing he says is, stay in your head and you're dead. And he says that at some point. This is not at the beginning, this is later, because a lot of people have admitted they have had what he calls breakthroughs. And they've had these kind of cathartic breakthroughs. And then, but some people haven't. And he asked them to stand at one point. And so a lot of people stand and he has them write down, stay in your head and you're dead. And so he's telling them, you're thinking too much. And so this is another technique, is that your thinking is holding you back. You're thinking things through, or you're analyzing, you're observing. That's all bad, because you're not going to have this breakthrough and this realization until you put that aside and you go with, he might say, go with your gut or something like that. And that's a way to manipulate people into being suggestible to their feelings and also to what's going on around them. Like the peer pressure of what's happening with all the people around you in a large group gathering like that is very strong. You tend to start feeling what you think you should be feeling, or what you see other people feeling. And so now if other people are feeling a certain way and everything, you can begin to feel that way. It's just kind of it's the power of suggestion is what it is. And that's very strong in those groups. And so when he tells them that, then that kind of makes them more open to, like, okay, I'm not going to think about this. And of course that means if you're not thinking, then you're not thinking critically about what he's doing and what's happening. And that has to be removed, otherwise you're not going to be affected by anything. So if you're doing this as the leader, you don't want critical thinking there at all. You want people to just feel things and go with the flow of what's happening. So, and then he has them do these exercises. They do a breathing exercise, and they do physical touching and guided meditation. These are all techniques that have been done by others. And I had mentioned earlier at the beginning of the program, the EST seminars with Werner Erhard, that became landmark. A lot of these things, the guided meditation and everything, was done, breathing exercises. This also reminded me some of the things he was doing in I Am Not Your Guru. I don't know if you've ever seen the video. I think it was done by Gods of the New Age, by Jeremiah Films, I think. It's like 3 hours long or something, but there's a section in there on Rajneesh. And Rajneesh, the guru in Oregon, who's now dead, but he had a large following across the country. They show them jumping up and down in that tent, and they're chanting and jumping up and down. And that is another, that's a hypnosis going on. So what these techniques are that you can actually see, and I am not your guru. You can see some similar techniques that Rajneesh did. Maybe they're a little more subtle and not as overt, but they're still there. And so he's using these group conditioning, mind conditioning techniques. And so you really think you're going through an experience. You really think you're discovering something. You think you're special. You're here with all these people that are having these wonderful insights. It's all it's what used to be called brainwashing. I really think mind conditioning is a better word because I think it describes it more accurately than brainwashing. Brainwashing kind of has a very, I don't know, it's maybe been overused or something and has a lot of baggage attached to it. But mind conditioning is what's really happening here.
Right.
So you've got the
Marcia,
principles and the mind conditioning working together.
right. Marcia, with everything that we're talking about, I know I'm just jumping into this conversation. At the very beginning of the documentary, Tony Robbins is Not Your Guru, you see an interaction. The very first part opens up, and he's talking to somebody who's saying that he gets too much in his head and he's dealing with suicidal thoughts. Tony Robbins says, "Oh, that's a nice pair of shoes you have," and he smiles and says, "Thank you." And just so you know, too, the document has if you watch it, has a lot of language. So just prepare yourself if you do watch it. But he says, "Those are a nice pair of shoes you have," and the guy says, "Well, thank you," and smiles. And Tony Robbins says, "Well, don't smile. You're going to blank everything up." And everyone laughs, and then he progresses on, and he has this big breakthrough. You know which clip I'm talking about? Would that be an example of what you're referring to as far as the getting too much in your head that Tony Robbins refers to, and the
Yes.
NLP that you would say is manipulative? Or what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I think
segment?
saying something completely unexpected like that, like you have nice shoes or your shoes are really nice or something after, yeah, I think it's a way, it throws you off guard because, and I think that he does that in these seminars too. He says things you don't expect, or he does unexpected things that always throws people off guard. So then when you're thrown off guard, then you're not, especially if something else happens right away, you're not able to take it in. You can't process it. And so this is all to make you're more suggestible. And I think that I think that that's what it is. These are all techniques that make somebody more suggestible. So just saying something that throws you off guard, that's completely not related to anything else. I don't know. That's what I think of that particular. I don't remember. I saw this. I mean, I have an article on my website called Tony Robbins' Seduction of Reprogramming. And it's about that documentary, I'm Not Your Guru, because of course I had to watch that when I think my son told me about it. And I thought, I need to see this because now we can really watch what he does and not get it other ways, like from his books or what people say or what he says. We can actually at least see a lot of it. Of course, you couldn't see all of it. So you don't really know what's going on because they also divide everybody into groups who meet on a regular basis. And, I don't really know everything that goes on those groups. They're divided into teams, and each team has a leader, and those leaders report back to Tony Robbins. So he hears about things, he hears stories from different people in the groups, things they might confess that have happened in their life or whatever, and might bring them up in front of the whole group. In fact, he does that in the movie. And that's another thing is when you get somebody to stand up and you're in a room with, I forgot how many people in this room, 1,500 or something, I can't remember. You're kind of there again, you're in a situation where you can't really think things through. Because I mean, you're standing up there with, maybe 1,000 people looking at you. What person is going to be, kind of self-possessed enough to stand there and not be vulnerable to whatever Tony Robbins might say to you. And the scene that really got me was the woman who stood up and had been in a cult. I think that Tony Robbins found out about it from the team later. I can't remember, but he has her stand up And she talks about having been in this cult, the Children of God, which was a very, you guys must, I'm sure, know about it, very abusive cult child where they did sexual abuse to children. And she had been through that. Now, she doesn't use the word cult, but she says, I was in a destructive movement or something like that. And he talks to her, and you think that what's going on is this very positive thing. But it's all this manipulation, and she of course feels special because he's talking to her. And then what really got me is that he said, I want to, I don't want to just leave it this way. I want to make sure that you're taken care of. And he said, I'm going to do something. We're going to assign you, three kind of guardians, or I think he calls them uncles. And so he says, who wants to be her guardian? And so three men stand up, not all at the same time, but one, two, three, they all stand up saying they're going to follow up with her and keep up with her. And I wrote in my article, how does Tony Robbins know that one of these men is not some kind of predator? So, he could be a scam artist, he could be a rapist, he could be, who knows who these men are. And he has them stand up. And so then she feels like, oh, this is so wonderful. These three men are going to follow up and make sure I'm okay. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like setting somebody up for possibly for something horrible. So that really got to me when he did that. And that's the kind of thing that you see that people interpret, I think, as a positive thing. And like he cares about her, when actually I think, it shows that he's not really caring about her.
There was multiple aspects of that made me feel real uneasy. Was the fact that actually he didn't choose any of the men. The men were already standing, and I just watched. This is why I remember. He makes her choose who she's comfortable with. And but check this out. Check this out. He knows her story is so sad. He then states that I'm going to put you into all of these other classes that we're going to pay for. And you're going to be someone that's just like me. You're going to be great, but in your own way. So what did he see? He saw a sad situation. And the way that it could be redeemed was making her a figurehead for his seminars. That's what I saw. And I was like, whoa, this is horrible. And you're exactly right. In terms of the groups that are there, it shows you in that documentary that prior to choosing some of the people who stand up, he's already told about them, told about their situation. So he asks specific questions to get the category of those types of people to stand up, then he chooses. And so he's not saying things off a whim. He's not going by quote unquote the spirit. He's methodical in who he chooses, the questions he asks, how he presents himself, and mainly what it is to do is to validify the success of the breakthroughs and the seminars that these individuals just paid for. I didn't see self-care or self-help for any of these individuals. I just saw him trying to prove in front of a bunch of people that his seminar works constantly.
Yeah, and as we wrap up here, I'll just say too that I've been in situations where I've been in like a pastoral meeting where there's someone across the table in a very similar situation, and you're just like, you feel almost helpless, like, what do I even say to this person, knowing that the gospel is the answer? And you've been in situations like that too. I think that was probably one of the hardest things, is to see how someone like Tony Robbins handles that versus someone who's a pastor walking somebody through, for example, somebody who's been a victim of sex trafficking, or in this case, the children of God. Quite the antithesis of how those two situations would be approached.
Yeah, exactly. That was another sad thing about it, is that here's somebody who really needed to know about Christ. And instead she's getting Tony Robbins philosophy, who tells her that she survived because she's pure love. He keeps telling her she's pure love. And, that seems to make her feel better, but it's all very false, and it's all going to fall apart. And you're right. He uses all those situations to make him look good. That's the whole idea, so that more people will come to the seminars.
No, thank you, Marcia. Well, that's a great way to wrap up the first segment. Really enjoyed this episode, the part that I was able to join in on, and super excited to be part of the full episode, part two, as it's been a while since we've reunited with the Kraken. So ready to release the Kraken in part 2, talking about Tony Robbins. So we'll talk to you all next week on Cultish. Talk to you guys soon.